Hello, I'm Morgan Pehme, Editor-in-Chief of City and State, and this is Last Look. Today, our guest is Neal Rosenstein. He's the Government Relations Coordinator for NYPIRG, and we're on location at the NYPIRG Common Cause New York Voter Hotline headquarters. Neal, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, good afternoon, Morgan.
So how is today going in comparison to primary day for voter complaints?
Well, you know, this is a higher turnout election for the general, and you would expect a lot more calls, but we've actually been really pleasantly surprised. Things seem to be, with some notable exceptions, running a lot smoother out here than they were on primary day with the levers.
Do you think that's a testament to the Board of Elections being more effective?
Yeah, I think part of it is certainly that. You also have poll workers who may have been newly recruited in the primary, and then they've gone through the runoff as well, and now they have the general, so they're more used to procedures. There was this transition from lever machines to optical scan machines, which has obviously caused some glitches and some problems for voters. But all in all, I think the running of poll sites, mine for example, was pretty smooth this morning.
Does that mean, can we extrapolate that it's the electronic voting machines are more effective than the lever machines?
Well, that would be our argument. There's a lot of nostalgia for the lever machines. I mean, for one, I love pulling that handle. You can just like feel the gears move and that clunk. But when we were deciding in New York whether or not how we should replace our lever machines, optical scan was found to have lower rates of undervoting. In other words, more people vote using a paper ballot than they do using the lever machine. They're more accessible to people in wheelchairs who may not be able to reach up high. There's an actual auditable, verifiable audit trail, the actual ballots, if there are any real discussions after the election or problems that are particularly easy to look at. So we're big fans of optical scan, but there have been some problems, clearly, with how it's been implemented here in New York.
This morning when I went to vote, I didn't receive any instructions from the poll workers to turn over the ballot and look for the referenda. Have we heard any complaints about that today?
Yeah, we've actually been doing a survey of some of the callers coming into the helpline, and a lot of folks are, I think, rating their ballot as very, very poorly designed. I mean, for goodness sakes, there isn't even an arrow on the front of the ballot telling you that there's something on the back of the ballot. And if you have eyesight like mine, which isn't horrible, about normal for someone who's 53, and you turn it over, it just kind of looks like, is it gibberish, is it directions? You may not know they were proposals. And I think that's going to account for a lot less people voting on those proposals than would have and could have if we had better ballot design and better information about the proposals.
We've heard a lot about the 6-point font type being unreadable, particularly for older voters. Has that been a problem today as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. And we had one call from an older voter who actually brought a flashlight with them, because sometimes it's not only the size but the light. And in some of these auditoriums, the LEDs in these privacy booths aren't enough. It was interesting. I went to my site. I have the lightest prescription you can get. It's like 1.25 or so for reading. I really never use them unless this font size is very small. I tried without my glasses. I could not read, that ballot. I tried to use that magnifying glass, and it kind of looked like a special effects from an episode of 1967 Star Trek where there's kind of like a flashback or something happening. The magnifying glasses, though, a nice effort by the board, were not sufficient. I brought my glasses because I knew, and I was able to accurately and completely fill in my ballot. There wasn't anything telling people to vote and turn it over, and I was looking around me. There are privacy booths, obviously, and I think a lot of people made that similar mistake, not knowing to turn the ballot over.
The executive director of the Board of Elections, Michael Ryan, told us that font size is a function of state law. Is that accurate in your estimation?
It's half accurate, and we agree with the executive director, Mr. Ryan, that the state legislature has been deficient, dysfunctional. They have not passed common sense ballot reform, which would enable that ballot to be larger and to be better designed. But there are things which the city could have done as well. I mean, we had 5-point font back in 2010, and advocates like us, like the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, have been screaming and saying, listen, there's no reason you need to have a ballot, let's say in Queens, that has on one ballot English, Spanish, Chinese, Korean, and Bengali. Those are the languages required by law in certain parts of the city. And because in Queens, you have to get those basic 5 languages or 4 languages on the ballot, different alphabets, that means you have to make the font size minuscule. And to be fair to other boroughs, you can't have tiny font size in Queens and big font size in Staten Island. It's kind of a equal protection issue. So the font size for everyone is tiny. The board fell down on the job. They haven't had an executive director for 2 years. The commissioners, I think, failed in that responsibility. We hope Mike Ryan will now not only look at pushing the state legislature, but looking in-house and saying, why can't we do what LA does? Have a ballot in English and Spanish, another ballot in English and Chinese, another ballot in English and Korean, another ballot in English and Bengali. You need the English so the poll workers can figure out what the ballots are. And therefore, you could probably double the font size than what they have. There's more the board could be doing at home. They could also be looking at ballot on demand, printing out a ballot in your language at your poll site. It's a more long-term project, but one they should be looking into. So the very long response is Mike Ryan is right. The legislature has failed, but there's things which the board could and should do. He's new to his post. There's no reason by next year's statewide elections and primary that this problem shouldn't be fixed and resolved, if not by the City Board of Elections, then by the state.
Neal, are there any other notable problems that you've observed today? We heard about some bizarre incidents in the 52nd AD in Brooklyn.
Yeah, and those were kind of troubling. To give an example, there's 29 polling sites in the 52nd AD. 9 of them reported problems to us, and we certainly don't get calls from every single voter who had a problem at a poll site, so there could be more. It's obvious that there was some kind of breakdown. Either the board didn't program them correctly, they weren't tested properly as well to catch this problem before it went out there, and that's a big problem for voters in those districts. Now, luckily, they're just voting on paper ballots, and if those scanners are fixed by the end of the day, they'll go in. But if there was a close race in Brooklyn in the 52nd, I think we would be hearing a lot more of that. And it would be a bigger issue, and it's one which the board should be answering and explaining to folks why it happened, and more importantly, why it won't happen again.
And that is the AD that encompasses Brooklyn Borough Hall, is that correct?
Yes, I believe every single scanner in Brooklyn Borough Hall for 7 EDs was out this morning. This was PS 321 in Park Slope. This is Cobble Hill. Parts of the district go into Prospect Heights and other parts of kind of downtown and Brownstone, Brooklyn.
Neal Rosenstein, thank you so much for joining us.